Hey guys, I'm Eddie Hearn from Matchroom Boxing, and today we're going to look at some of the greatest fights I've ever promoted. So when I make a fight, the first thing that I have to overcome is ego. Ego of the fighters, ego of the managers, ego of the lawyers, everybody that don't like each other. You've got to negotiate the purse, the first and most important thing. Flights, hotels, drug testing, sanction fees, belts, ring size, glove size, the weight, is there a catch weight, is there championship weight? So many things to negotiate that all roll on up until fight night. The most important thing is to be fair. I mean, we have to act with integrity, we've got a good reputation for that, but you also want to fight for your client. You want to make sure that if there's an edge for him in any way, you get it. Generally, common sense prevails. The problem is, not a lot of common sense in boxing. Joshua Klitschko, 29th of April 2017. One of the greatest fights in the history of heavyweight boxing. 90,000 people at the National Stadium in Wembley for the Unified Heavyweight World Championship. This fight was a massive gamble for Anthony Joshua. He'd just won the World Heavyweight title against Charles Martin, defended it against Dominic Breazeale and then Eric Molina. But Vladimir Klitschko, one of the great heavyweights of our generation, reigned in the division for years and years, lost to Tyson Fury on points, wanted to come back and cause a statement in the division, regain his heavyweight championships, and Joshua, still a baby. No right to be in there with someone as good or as experienced as Vladimir Klitschko. And it was a case of, is Anthony Joshua ready for Vladimir Klitschko? Would Klitschko take on such a young, fierce lion in Anthony Joshua? Luckily, the answer was yes, and we got one of the greatest fights of all time. I mean, in a fight like that, the structure of the deal is quite simple. All the money in the pot, 50-50 down the middle, costs are agreed, revenues brought into the show, the profit of the show is split between the fighters. Both guys happily signed up to full VADA testing for that fight, something that's sometimes hard to do with certain opponents. Every press conference, every media day had a huge global reach in terms of news outlets. It was news everywhere in every country. I'd like to say it was difficult to fill Wembley Stadium. We could have filled Wembley Stadium about 3 times over. We sold out that fight in the first day. Sadiq Khan came on and helped us actually with the transport to increase the attendance. Honestly, could have sold 200,000 tickets for that show. It was incredible. I mean, I think going into the fight, no one was really sure how good is Anthony Joshua, how much does Vladimir Klitschko left. You could hardly split him in terms of the betting odds. Joshua the slight favourite going in, but no one was sure how this one would go. This fight was just one of the most epic, emotional roller coasters you could ever watch in a fight. Both guys came out a little bit tentative early on, and Anthony Joshua dropped Vladimir Klitschko in the 5th round. It was incredible. I thought the fight was over, and so did Anthony Joshua. He let the kitchen sink go at him in that 5th round and completely gassed out. He emptied his tank, and at the end of the round, Vladimir Klitschko came back and nearly stopped Anthony Joshua. The 6th round he came out, he got hit by one of the biggest right hands I've ever seen, and Joshua went down, got up, found his feet, found a way somehow to refill his tank and get back into the fight and take it to him in the later rounds, of course, dropping him twice and stopping him in the 11th round. We don't choose the referee, but both camps in that instance wanted to make sure they had the right referee in place. In that instance, Vladimir Klitschko insisted on a non-British referee that night. And after that fight, firstly, 2 guys will be remembered for giving us one of the greatest fights of all time, but for AJ, who was already a star going into that fight, just catapulted himself really to hero size in the UK and also globally as well. For Vladimir Klitschko, I think he left the sport humbled and actually satisfied that he'd given everybody everything he had. He gave everybody a war that night at Wembley, and sometimes that's a good way to bow out, but everyone gave him so much respect because he kept getting off the floor to try and win the fight against Anthony Joshua, and at the end the 2 embraced, and to be honest, they were both heroes. April 30th, 2022, Madison Square Garden, Katie Taylor against Amanda Serrano for the undisputed lightweight world championship. Katie Taylor, of course, achieved so much as an amateur, 5-time world amateur champion, Olympic gold medalist, and already undisputed lightweight world champion. Amanda Serrano, 7-division world champion. Really, we've seen tremendous growth in women's boxing, led by Katie Taylor. We reached the pinnacle on April the 30th at the Mecca of boxing, Madison Square Garden, the biggest female fight of all time. Well, the good and bad news about making this fight was Jake Paul, can you believe, was Amanda Serrano's promoter. It was a little bit difficult, but really great to work with because he pushed this fight so hard with us.
I bet Amanda wins for $1 million. Okay. Let's shake up on it. Let's go.
Oh. Jake Paul wanted his client to get $1 million for this fight, and obviously we needed to make sure we gave Katie Taylor the same or more. Both females made over 7 figures that night at Madison Square Garden. Luckily, we filled the place up, and they deserved it. Every belt in boxing was on the line that night. You've got to put them all on the line, and Amanda Serrano had the chance to win them all in one fight. So we decided to go to Madison Square Garden, the Mecca of boxing, and I felt like a fight of this magnitude had to have an iconic venue like that, and we sold a lot. The promotion for this fight was great. I mean, we had ourselves, Matchroom, me, Katie Taylor, a legend of the sport, we had Amanda Serrano, and we had Jake Paul, using his platforms, using his channel, using his content to push this fight as hard as possible. It's difficult sometimes with a character as big as Jake Paul. You don't want him to oversize the fighters, but you've got to use him in the right way. And he helped us sell this show to the full. This fight was backwards, forwards, it was up, it was down. Katie Taylor dominated the early part of the fight, then all of a sudden decided to go to war with Amanda Serrano. She got hurt badly, I think it was the 4th or 5th round. Looked like she was going to get stopped in the fight. Somehow came back into the fight to win the closing rounds as well. It was a split decision, 2-1 in terms of the judges' scorecards for this fight, and the right person won, and we embraced, we celebrated when we heard, and still the undisputed champion of the world. Well, this fight was massive for female boxing and, of course, men's boxing as well. You only have to look at the increased numbers of girls and females attending grassroots boxing now. And that's what you need. You need an ambassador, you need a role model to drive young people into the sport. And there's no better role model than Katie Taylor. November 9th, 2019, Staples Center, Los Angeles. KSI against Logan Paul 2. Can't believe I did it, but what an experience. The history of this one, I watched the first one. They told me they'd booked out Manchester Arena. It was going to go on pay-per-view around the world. I thought they must be mad. Who's going to watch that? The answer was everybody. I thought I better do the rematch. Dealing with these two was very, very difficult. Dealing with their representation, dealing with their lawyers, dealing with their egos, but two very, very clever guys. Two guys who knew how to create content, two guys who knew how to engage the audience, and somehow we managed to put them in a ring in front of about 13,000 people in Los Angeles. So they asked me to get involved in this fight. I said, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly. Proper training camps, no head guards, no big gloves. If you want to fight, we'll have a real fight. These guys went through a rigorous training camp in a proper ring, properly licensed. They made their professional debut that night in Los Angeles. In one corner, Logan Paul, absolutely useless. In another corner, KSI, absolutely useless. But the good news was it was a 50-50 fight, which always means entertainment. And fair play to them, they put on a good fight that night. The challenges was, in this instance, it was like, who's bigger? You know, this guy, I've got more YouTube subscribers, I've got this, I did more hits on that. I don't care, guys. There's a lot of money on the table here. Stop being idiots. Let's sit down and figure out a deal. So we did that. And to be fair to them, once we started, it was actually plain sailing. Apart from the press conferences, which were probably the most cringe thing I've ever been involved with in my career. I'd stand up there, I'd say, what's your comment on this fight? And next thing he's saying about his mum, and his mum's this and his mum's that. And I'm watching my credibility drain away. But it was a massive learning experience for me. The live press conference had about 6 or 7 million people watching a press conference. The pay-per-view buys around the world were huge, and it was a different kind of audience that started to engage with us. And even now, to this day, if I go and pick the kids up from the school, they know me from the KSI Logan Paul fight. I think it did about 2 million pay-per-view buys for this show. Incredible. Pay-per-view in the UK, pay-per-view in America, pay-per-view all around the world. Huge numbers. And as I said, these two, fantastic at engaging their audience. So when we talk about pay-per-view and streaming, obviously DAZN are our partner. We see that as the future. I think ultimately pay-per-view, particularly at the price point in the UK and the US, will end up dying out away from the mega fights and the mega names as well. The subscription model via a streaming partner, I think, is the future of the sport. There was the big debate around this fight. Is this good or bad for the sport of boxing? The thing is, it brought a whole new audience to the sport of boxing. I think ultimately good for the sport. Doesn't mean I'll do it again. Yeah, KSI the underdog in that fight. I'm not sure what to think about that. I'm not sure what to think about anything about this fight. I mean, Logan Paul looked the part. He was much bigger than KSI, but KSI probably had more boxing experience, but it was a complete coin flip that night. Fight night, the time these two got in the ring, I just didn't know what was going to happen. Everything was just absolutely crazy. The fight itself, KSI went down, he nearly got stopped, he controlled most of the fight, the bell went, I don't know what was going to happen. I can't remember the exact scorecards, but it was very, very close. KSI got the nod, the YouTube world went mad, bragging rights forever, both guys embraced, and we went home thinking, what have we just witnessed? But it was a lot of fun. Aftermath, someone just asked me the legacy of this fight. Please don't talk to me about legacy of this fight. Great fun, great memories, great experience. I was sitting next to Justin Bieber watching that fight. I have got one funny story if you just allow me to tell this story. That night, I'm sitting there, there's celebrities everywhere. Justin Bieber was sitting to my left watching the fight. All of a sudden, I've seen Ed Sheeran walk into the arena. He's getting mobbed. He's gone to the back of the floor. He's sitting 30 rows behind me. I said to my security, go and get Ed Sheeran, get him up here. So goes to get Ed Sheeran, walks him up, sits him 5 seats away from me. I said, Ed, how you doing, mate? He said, thanks, mate, thanks. I thought to myself, I don't think that's Ed Sheeran. Oh, it is Ed Sheeran, everyone says, that's 100% Ed Sheeran. And we realised it was an Ed Sheeran lookalike. We went on Ed Sheeran's Instagram and he was in Japan at the time. And I had to sling this geezer out of the Staples Centre for pretending to impersonate Ed Sheeran. May the 8th, 2021, Dallas Cowboys Stadium. Over 75,000 people to see the pound-for-pound #1, Canelo Alvarez, defend his unified world titles against the Brit and reigning world champion, Billy Joe Saunders. The process behind this fight, Canelo Alvarez wanted to be the undisputed super middleweight world champion. He just beat Callum Smith before that fight to win the WBA and the Ring Magazine Championship and the WBC title. Now he wanted Billy Joe Saunders' WBO Championship belt. So it was champion against champion for the unified super middleweight world championship. Well, for this, obviously, Canelo Alvarez, the biggest star in the sport, huge subscription numbers, 75,000 people there, international TV revenue everywhere. But Billy Joe Saunders had to get the purse that he wanted. Also, we were just coming out of COVID, wasn't sure how the gate was going to go, didn't even know whether we'd be able to get 75,000 people in there. Billy Joe Saunders, probably a 6-time maximum purse for him. We all know the pull power and the money-making machine of Canelo Alvarez. Both guys, huge paydays on that night. I chose Texas because I wanted to make history. I wanted to create the biggest attendance in US boxing history. Jerry Jones, a great man, great businessman. Dallas Cowboys Stadium, AT&T, it had it all. A lot of Hispanic fight fans and community in Texas as well, and we filled the whole thing up. The atmosphere was one of the best atmospheres I've ever seen, and Billy Joe Saunders came into the ring fearless, getting booed by 75,000 people. Tyson Fury was there, his family were there, his friends were there, other boxers as well, and came in and boxed really, really well in the fight. All of a sudden got hit by a shot by Canelo Alvarez, busted his orbital bone, probably one of the worst injuries you could get in boxing, and on the stool, his corner had to pull him out. The fight was over. Aftermath of the fight, incredible scenes in Texas. Unfortunately for Billy Joe Saunders, had to go to the hospital to get his orbital bone taken care of and have surgery on that. For Canelo Alvarez, it was about adding one more belt on the road to undisputed. Anthony Joshua defending his World Heavyweight Championship against Andy Ruiz at Madison Square Garden. The history of this fight was an absolute nightmare. We had planned Anthony Joshua's first fight in America, the big American debut. Who better than Jarrell Big Baby Miller? Big mouth, big heavyweight. All of a sudden the fight was made, tickets were sold out, and I was at home one night and I got the horrible phone call from the drug testing company to say Jarrell Miller had tested positive. And I got another phone call about 2 days later to say tested positive again. He was on the juice for this fight. I couldn't believe it. The fight was off. We only had a couple of weeks to go to secure an opponent. Who slides into my DMs? Andy Ruiz. Now he's a little bit chubby, but I know he's very, very good. I thought, great fight for Anthony Joshua, credible heavyweight, fought for the World Heavyweight Championship before, fantastic. The promotion for this fight was quite interesting. You had the global star Anthony Joshua, but you had Andy Ruiz, who looked terrible in a pair of shorts. I mean, I'm talking terrible. I mean, I don't look great in a pair of shorts. I look $1 million compared to Andy Ruiz in fight shorts. But the guy can really fight. Anthony Joshua, a huge favourite. A lot of it was down to the way that Andy Ruiz looked. People in boxing knew that Andy Ruiz was a great fighter. Some gave him a chance, but Josh, an overwhelming favourite for that matchup. We go out there that night, the world is watching. Madison Square Garden full up, the entire global media outlets brimming everywhere in the place. Anthony Joshua drops Andy Ruiz in the third round. We think, lovely, we're going to go for a few beers now, what a successful evening, and all of a sudden, a huge hook to the top of the head. The fight changes in one of the most epic rounds, round 3 of that fight in the history of Madison Square Garden. Anthony Joshua goes down 4 or 5 times in the fight. The fight is over. The aftermath was horrendous at Madison Square Garden. Back in the changing room, the doctor said that Joshua had concussion. He didn't want him to go to the press conference. Joshua wanted to go to the press conference. He eventually went to the press conference. I had to go up beforehand and run the press conference with Andy Ruiz celebrating the victory with the belts everywhere. I felt sick in my stomach as I was talking about the result of this fight. Next day, going to see AJ in his apartment in New York, just devastated, trying to put on a brave face, but then it's all about the road back, it's about the comeback, it's about the get back. We knew we had a rematch clause. It was up to AJ whether he wanted to activate it. The answer was absolutely yes. The rematch was made, and the rest is history. He won them all back. Well guys, that was it. Great memories, great fights, plenty more to come. Thanks for watching.